Welcome back to Last Turn. This is episode 4, brought to you by co-hosts Bart and Evan.
Hello.
How are you doing today, Evan?
I'm so good. I've been having a blast with Wild.
Same here. I've also been having a blast with Wild, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about today.
Yay!
But first, we wanted to thank all of our new listeners. So we recently posted on our competitive HS, and we got a lot of positive feedback and a lot of listenership, new subscribers to our channel. So thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
We hope that
it's all appreciated.
We really hope that you enjoy all the content that we produce in the future and continue to follow us. So, like we said, today we want to talk a little bit about Wild, because Standard's been relatively stable. Wild's also heating up because there is the Wild Open tournament that is in the midst of happening. Mm-hmm. So we think that there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had. So, Evan, why don't you introduce us to Wild? What is the Wild format?
The Wild format is every Hearthstone card, from the beginning of Hearthstone to now, as opposed to Standard, which is just the 2 years' most recent sets. There's probably a smarter way to say that. But as a result, the decks can be much more wildly powerful, for example, or do much more maybe obnoxious things, or subtle things, or surprising things, or crazy things. Not just because the individual cards are stronger in the old sets. That's not. I wouldn't say that's really necessarily true. Hearthstone is power creep, so a lot of newer cards are individually stronger. But what happens when you start making the number of cards available bigger and bigger is the interactions start to really get out of hand. That's really what makes Wild decks wild is the interactions and how well certain cards go with each other, not just that the individual cards are strong.
I definitely agree. So I think that when you have many sets, obviously you accumulate more individually powerful cards, and when you have decks of limited sizes, then more of the cards in your deck are going to be stronger just because you have a larger card pool. But definitely, that also opens you up to having sort of crazier interactions between cards that were printed at really distant time points that maybe when one was designed, the other wasn't considered, and that could be true sort of in both directions. So there's a lot to be said about that. So in addition to cards that are not standard legal, something interesting and sort of related to synergies and card interactions is that Wild is home for cards that don't have sufficient support to be like big players in Standard, but are still very powerful. So I think the most notable examples of this are like Kazakus and N'Zoth. Mm-hmm. So, which are often played together. So N'Zoth in Standard, I mean, I love N'Zoth. I think it's great, and I've tried to build a lot of decks around it, but you just don't have Sludge Belcher in Standard. You have Infested Tauren.
You need the Belcher. Infested Tauren is, I don't know. I try to think of a good example. If Sludge Belcher's a car, I guess Infested Tauren is like Hot Wheels.
Yeah, it's like less than a tricycle. It's not very good. It dies to like everything.
Like I can see how they look similar, but functionally there's a huge difference.
Definitely, yeah. The 5 toughness versus 3 is
and the
really
second taunt. I mean, that's, to me, that is it. The second taunt. The fact that
huge.
They need 3 attacks to get you in the face when you have Sludge Belcher out. Pretty much every other taunt in the game is 2. I guess another exception is Divine Shield, baby.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's really strong though, because a lot of the decks in Wild are not. Well, some of them are go wide. There's a fair amount of go wide strategies. We'll talk about them, but a lot of very strong ones are not go wide strategies. They're trying to put 1 or 2 minions on the board that are very strong, so they have a tough time with Sludge Belcher. And I think Sludge Belcher is just an insane card. So is Death Lord.
Yes.
So, another example, and we'll discuss this deck soon, is actually Stand Against Darkness. So this is a card that is, I believe, Standard legal. And was that in Karazhan?
Yeah, I think it's in Whispers.
I see.
I think the Darkness are the old gods. That's what they're standing against.
Yeah, and there's tentacles on the card. That's definitely Whispers.
It's gotta be. Tentacles, done.
So Stand Against Darkness is a card that just has not seen any play in Standard and is really pretty mediocre in the context of a Standard deck, but is a pretty big player in Wild right now.
It's 5 mana for 5 1/1 Silverhand recruits in Paladin, in case you don't know what the card does.
Right.
Which sounds like a great deal. Normally, with the hero power, that would cost 10 mana at over 5 turns. This you get to pay half as much and get them all at once. But oh boy, you're susceptible to something that does 1 damage to everything. Like
Maelstrom Portal.
You're committing a 5 mana card, the entire card. It's not like it's a 2/2 that gives you 3 1/1s. You know, that would be a little safer. You don't get blown out by Maelstrom Portal so badly. But this is just 5 1/1s. So if they have the Ravaging Ghoul, if they have the Wild Pyromancer, the Swipe, it's just so many things that can go wrong that prevents it from being good in Standard, at least.
Yeah, but in Wild there's enough synergy to make it very powerful.
That's what makes it this monster in Wild. It sounds like I still haven't seen this deck in action.
It's strong. I played a lot of it.
Oh wait, no, I did see you play it once.
Yeah, it's a big one. I mean, Quartermaster is a good card.
That's silly. So that's one way to get around Maelstrom Portal is to make them all 3/3s.
Yeah. So I mean, paying 10 mana to get all that is very good. So in addition to these sort of less supported cards in Standard, like we'd mentioned, Wild has all of the old favorites. You definitely see Dr. Boom, Sludge Belcher, Deathlord. These are cards we've mentioned. Mysterious Challenger, that's another one.
Sylvanas.
Anybody remember that? Sylvanas, of course, any Hall of Fame card.
Piloted Shredder.
Gotta love the Shredder. Reno Jackson.
He's definitely important. Haunted Creeper.
Oh, yeah.
Annoyatron.
Oh, these are all so good. I love hearing these names.
Yeah, fond memories.
Oh, it's so good. So
Grim Patron. It is a card.
Luckily, not a lot of Grim Patron, but I'm sure there's somebody running Patron deck. There's a lot of support for it. It's just no Warsong Commander. So there's also a lot of redundant cards. Because you have such a large card pool, you have access to a lot of effects that are functionally very similar. So going back to Stand Against Darkness, you also have Lost in the Jungle and Muster for Battle. So if you can synergize somehow with having a lot of Silverhand recruits or just a lot of minions on the board in Paladin, then you have access to a lot of effects that do the same thing. So you can have these Wild decks that are actually pretty consistent.
Yeah, the plan.
Right. Yes, you can build a plan around these interactions and have it come to fruition more often. Because I mean, in addition to all of those enablers, you have the other sort of part of the equation. You have Quartermaster and Lightfuse Stegodon.
Yeah. Yes. I had to think about the second card for a sec.
Right. So there's a lot of the redundancy makes these Wild decks very powerful and consistent and good at sort of enacting their strategies and pushing forth their win conditions.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Achieve their plans extremely consistently because there's so many cards that actually fulfill a role in the plan really well, as opposed to like the very beginning of Hearthstone was sort of the opposite of that. Like every deck had Chillwind Yeti. No one really had a plan that was specific. Pretty much every deck just wanted to play good cards until their opponent had no life left. And as the game has developed and the number of cards available has increased, the ability to have a specific plan and pull that really specific, really powerful thing off has only increased. Every time they add a new set, that goes up for Wild. Because Standard loses sets, you have to start from scratch periodically, but Wild has only gotten more and more focused.
Yeah, definitely, and the designers have gotten more talented, in my opinion.
Yes,
I think they've gotten to know their game pretty well, and they pump out some really fun mechanics that interact with past stuff really well.
Yes, they've been able to make some cards that seem sometimes just seem like outright dangerously powerful, even. That ultimately, when you see them at work in the game, you realize that they actually did think about it ahead of time and foresaw these problems, and there are actually reasons why it isn't a real problem, or it's only a problem randomly, occasionally.
Yeah, totally.
Like Yogg-Saron is an example of them finding a creative solution later, maybe not when they printed it, but finding a way to let something be a problem, but not often enough.
Right. It's balanced. It's a little bit less unfair. Yogg-Saron doesn't just reset the game always.
But they were able to give it that crazy text. It's like a crazy thing for a card to do. But they ultimately they figured out a way to make it functional. And they've gotten even better at doing that. So they're making even more cards nowadays that have text like "whoa," like with Yogg-Saron, that wind up being not broken, just still really good.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of examples of that. We could spend an entire episode on that. So we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the decks that are in the metagame, and we wanted to sort of move through by archetype because, as you might predict, there's a lot of decks in Wild. And also, the Wild metagame is relatively young. It's kind of counterintuitive to say that, but there's not a lot of tournament support for Wild, and because of that, the format hasn't really been fleshed out. Data reports only recently started for Wild. I believe that there's one total, and other than that, there's there's a subreddit for it and some discussion, and a few websites have gone and made tier lists and stuff, but there hasn't been as thorough an exploration into the possible Wild trends as there is for Standard, and because of that, I think that there's a lot of strategies that we see in Wild that may or may not be viable at the very end, but currently are being played and are winning games.
And
so
it's not like when even though a new set, when you compare it to how much is available in Wild, it's relatively less. But we were just discussing before how that might actually mean it's more important. Like adding this new set of cards like Un'Goro's effect on Wild was not reduced because Wild's so big. It was actually amplified because there's so many possible interactions. Totally. More than in Standard. So not only is this Wild metagame not getting explored, it's actually quite a thick jungle. It possibly made even deeper by a new set than Standard is made deeper by a new set.
Yeah, I mean, one card in particular is Curator. I mean, Curator has a lot more dragon targets in Wild than it does in Standard, and Un'Goro gave it a lot of beast targets, so it might have even made Curator a better card for Wild than it is in Standard. Hard to know.
You know what? That's... It's funny you say that because I recently have been playing Quest Rogue in both Standard and in Wild. I don't know what that says about me, but in Wild, I'm running the Curator.
Oh, that's so cool.
I'm running 2 Stone Tusk Boar, 2 Bluegill Warrior, and the Curator.
That's so silly.
Getting 10 damage for 3 mana off the Curator is just so filthy.
That is pretty gross.
It's been working.
I believe it. It's a little expensive for Quest Rogue, but I mean, if you manage to go long, that might be what you need.
Usually that happens, believe it or not.
Okay.
Or I can, coin it out, and they're like, what the hell? Where did 4/6 come from? And then suddenly they're scrambling. Plus, I mean, if I haven't completed the quest yet, if I've drawn a Boar or Bluegill Warrior already, it's very helpful for completing it.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. So let's start.
The Curator.
Curator is a good card. Let's start at some of the control decks in Wild.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's a few players here. There are a few cards that really make the control deck strong.
We mentioned 2, right?
Yeah, I mean we mentioned at least 3. There was Reno, Kazakus, and Nazoth.
Oh yeah, well, the only one of those is actually only in Wild is Reno, but that winds up being really good with the other 2.
Definitely.
And enabling those decks to a large extent.
Yeah, so a lot of the control decks, you can find them in a lot of different classes. There's also Control Shaman, but the Cabal classes, so Priest, Mage, and Warlock, all have a very strong Reno deck, and that's because they have access to Kazakus as well.
Kaziki.
Yes, Kaziki. And
or if you're a Priest, you get Raza, which is probably the best of the class-specific Singleton legends.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Inkmaster is good, but Raza is probably a little bit better. You generate more value over the course of the game. Also, Inkmaster is a bit more... Is that it as an Inkmaster? Inkmaster Solia? Is that what the card's called? Yeah. So Solia requires a little bit more setup than Raza. You can kind of just play Raza at any time. It's also a good body for its price.
And with Justicar Trueheart, another wild card
Ooh.
whose name I'd love to say is particularly good if you've got Raza going as well.
Right. So there's a few interesting things to say about these decks, and I think that even though the lists and the gameplay for the decks are pretty different, they have a lot in common. So N'Zoth and Reno, of course, and Kazakis, but it's worth talking about how the role N'Zoth plays in these decks. It is, in control mirrors, it is a finisher, and it is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful finisher in Wild. So this is a card you cast that when you cast it, the game is often just over on the spot if your opponent doesn't have an answer, or your opponent holds back an answer until fatigue to deal with your N'Zoth. It is really game-defining in these mirrors, and N'Zoth can target some of the best minions ever printed. Sludge Belcher, Deathlord, Piloted Treader, all cards we mentioned,
Sylvanas.
Mad Scientist, Sylvanas. These cards are great. And this is in addition to some of the class-specific death rattles, like Priest has a few that were printed in the most recent set.
There's also a big one is Deathlord. Plenty of these decks would be fine winning in fatigue, especially because they have Reno Jackson to reset their health, or maybe they're playing Warrior or Priest and can generate health with their hero power, and Deathlord the first time, and then again off of N'Zoth just gets them that much closer to getting you out of your deck.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that about Deathlord. I'm glad you brought that up.
It's a really significant thing. I've seen mage decks that are not Reno, they're just N'Zoth, Deathlord essentially, even sometimes with the Cold Light Oracle. And like and duplicate. Duplicate. Yeah, the Mad Scientist, and maybe even Echo of Medivh. And just tons of Deathlords until you don't have a deck.
Yeah, it's so Deathlord's downside is that when it dies, your opponent gets a random minion pulled out of their deck onto the battlefield. And I think over time that downside has actually become a bit more upside. And in some of these matchups, like the control mirrors, pulling a card out of their deck might mean that you win the fatigue war, but you also might. The sort of Christmas Land case is that you pull out their Reno, and they just don't have a Reno. Or
Kazakis, really.
Yeah, there's a lot of Battlecry minions you could pull out that really screw them. Jiraxis is another example. Quartermaster, I've had my Quartermaster pulled out so many times from a Deathlord, and that just feels terrible. Tarim, losing one of those cards is awful.
N'Zoth.
Yeah, totally.
So we're talking. You basically gave the setup. Like there's this card N'Zoth, and if you can play it from your hand, that's basically how you seal the deal in the control mirror. And then there's this minion that N'Zoth brings back that can actually be one of the only ways to completely hose your opponent from their N'Zoth. You pull it right out of their deck.
It's a little bit like Dirty Rat.
It's almost dirtier.
Dirtier Rat. There's definitely fewer ways to... I think there's less thinking and less gameplay as to when you decide to play your Deathlord than with Dirty Rat. You kind of just jam it when you have mana.
Yeah.
But it's definitely plays a similar role in disrupting your opponent's game plan in a sort of offbeat way. But these decks are very strong. I think probably the most prevalent, maybe even the most powerful of them, in my experience, is Reno Mage.
Mm-hmm. Mage has the edge of the Manic Soulcaster to get either an extra run at one of its best Battlecry minions, like an extra Kazakis, which is huge, or an extra N'Zoth if you're that lucky. It can also be one of the only ways to interact with your opponent, having the Dirty Rat, the Deathlord. If they Deathlord out your N'Zoth, if you're really any of the other Reno decks, that's too bad. If you're Mage, if you're really skilled, you can Manic Soulcaster back into your deck.
Yeah, so or Duplicate.
There's also Duplicate in Wild. Or if you get a random Echo of Medivh off of a Babbling Book or something, there's a lot of things that you can do in a control mirror as the Mage. And then against any aggro deck or any combo deck, you have Ice Block.
Oh yeah,
with it, which is, is Ice Block any good with Reno Jackson?
So Ice Block Reno is one of those combos. It's one of those combos you think about. You're like, wow, it's just It takes out all of the risk in running Reno. When you're playing Warlock, you have to sort of count, all right, what can my opponent possibly do from hand? What can they do from board? Like, is there any way I don't lose? Is there any way I lose if I don't play Reno this turn?
It's a balancing act. It's
With Mage, you
yeah.
just don't care. You play Ice Block, and you're like, I'm just gonna play minions. Oh, you pop my Ice Block, Reno Jackson.
You can just be as flagrant as possible and be like, I'll freeze all your guys, and like maybe they have the kill command, but then I just play Reno, and then if they don't, I win the game. Like you can make plays like that and not risk getting not risk any justice. Not there's no scenario where you get punished for playing greedy like that, which makes you a really difficult opponent to beat.
It definitely shuts off certain types of strategies from beating you. So combo-oriented strategies like Freeze Mage, or if there was like a combo Warlock deck. When you have Ice Block, that really hoses the combos, because oftentimes after you blow your combo, you don't have any gas left, or you have really, really minimal gas to maybe seal the deal. But sealing the deal on another 30 life is just often not possible.
Yeah, that's if it weren't for Reno, a combo deck that was like Hunter combo could still probably get there if you buy one turn, because then you can hero power them for the last bit. But the fact that they could just reset it, and like, do they have the Reno? I don't know, but they drew a ton of cards. They're a mage.
Right.
They just drew like half their deck.
Yeah, and they have so the deck is filled with some of the most powerful control tools ever printed. It also has a nice threat suite just in the death rattles that interact with N'Zoth, and a bunch of the wild cards like Sylvanas or Dr. Boom or whatever else the deck wants to run. So
things like Primordial Glyph and Arcanologist did not hurt.
Oh yeah, these are great. I mean, you have Mad Scientist.
Yeah, but so this is another way redundancy is nice and wild for these singleton decks. You can make up for the fact that you have to use so many singletons. You can get closer to consistency because you can run one Mad Scientist and one Arcanologist, and that gets you a little bit closer to the consistency of a deck that doesn't have to be singleton.
Yeah, so that's definitely true. I think that's true of pretty much all of the control classes, and obviously every class in Wild. But
for sure.
One of the I also think that this impacts Priest quite a lot. So Priest has access to Dragonfire Potion and Light Bomb.
That's another that's huge for Priest.
It's really big, and they have access to Holy Nova and Excavated Evil, and they also have the Shadow Visions, so they can. They have this sort of toolbox of spells that are slightly different but very similar, and they can often hit one of them when they need to off of their Shadow Visions or just draw them, and that makes the deck a lot more consistent, a lot more able to deal with pressure than just sort of hoping that you draw your board wipe and hoping you draw your Reno and hoping you draw your threats.
Because Priest removal, as good as it is often very specific, like Shadow Word Pain and Shadow Word Death. Like, you look at them, like, these are, like, both really specific, complete opposites. Having Shadow Visions gives you so much better chance of being able to grab the right one when the moment comes down to it. Like, they play the Vicious Fledgling, or they play the 10/10 Van Cleef, and, like, if you don't have the right one, you lose. Those moments happen, and you can... have the right one fairly often if you get to use duplicates of both. But in this deck where you can't, Shadow Visions has done a lot. I've only played a few games, Reno, Priest in Wild, but Shadow Visions was always like, I'm so glad I have this in my hand. Like, I'm just ready. I feel like I'm ready for anything, because I also have two different things I can hit for the board wipe, the 2/6 cost board wipes. Very often, either one, the Dragonfire Potion or the Light Bomb, is going to be what I need.
Right.
And very many games, it was turn 5, I played the Shadow Visions, and I hit one of them, and next turn I reset, and I won that game.
Yeah, I definitely thought of Singleton Priest deck as soon as I saw Shadow Visions. The card is just sort of made for that.
Mm-hmm. But then it turned out in Standard it was actually unreal for doing Divine Spirit Inner Fire combos. With everything. So. Just there are 15 different cards in this deck because everything's duplicates.
So let's move on from control. I mean, I think that there is, obviously other control archetypes. There's sort of various control shaman builds which are gaining some traction, especially in the Wild Open. But I think that there's a lot of ground to cover.
There's also the Magnus 57 special control Quest Rogue with the Curator.
There's apparently there's also Curator Quest Rogue, top tier meta breaker.
It's control cancer.
I mean, you got to mix the two, right? That's how you win. You innovate.
Curator cancer. I found a way to
No
give
one's
a robot cancer.
No one's playing around Curator when you're playing Quest Rogue.
They'll learn.
They'll learn. They'll respect you. So we talked about sort of one end of the spectrum. These are all control decks that can win in fatigue, or they can win by presenting threats. The aggro decks in Wild are just as threatening and just as strong and very fierce. So maybe a few weeks ago, probably now also, but a few weeks ago when you heard about Wild from a Wild player, maybe one of the first decks they tell you about is Pirate Warrior.
And you probably already knew about it.
You probably already knew about it from one time you queued Wild and lost to it.
Well, I mean, you know of it from Standard.
That's true. And the list is actually almost identical to the Standard list.
But if you only know Standard Pirates and you don't know anything about Wild Pirates, there's at least one card that's makes a pretty big difference.
Yep, and that is Ship's Cannon.
The artillery.
So Ship's Cannon is an unassuming 2-mana 2/3 that saw no play when it was printed. And whenever you summon a pirate, it deals 2 damage to a random enemy.
So it doesn't say play from your hand. Anytime a pirate appears on your side of the board.
Right, so, when you're on coin and you Ship's Cannon coin out N'Zoth's First Mate and summons Patches, then you get your 1/3 weapon, your 2 1/1s, one of them has charge, and you hit 2 random targets on the other side of the board for 2 mana. So
for 2 damage each, plus you can also attack with the weapon. So it's like 6 damage, I think?
It's absurd. I mean, oftentimes, whatever threats they developed on their first turn are gone, or they're just down so much health. I think that one of the reasons that this card is so insane is that it's a 2-drop that can run away with the game.
Yeah. There's like Vicious Fledgling, which is 3, or Mana Tide Totem, but 2, and a pretty great 2 mana 2/3. It's like, it's exactly what you would want a body to be on a minion like this.
Yeah, it's not even understated. It's a fine card for the deck. It's a fine card for sort of tangoing with your opponent's board, but it also threatens to just make the game unwinnable if you don't have an answer for it quickly. Because I mean, you can't just play curve minions and hope to attack with them next turn when your opponent's dealing 2 damage to a random target every turn. It's just it's out of your hands at that point. You're going to lose to this thing just outvaluing you on the board.
Yeah, the free damage is already pretty overwhelming just from the warrior's weapons. Like, that's why Pirate Warrior is so hard to beat as another aggro deck, is because you keep putting threats out and they just chop them with their weapons. Right. And continue to smash you with their pirates. Now they also have this body that if it sits there, they get extra free damage. If they happen to have a low weapon hand and a high pirate hand, well, then they just wipe your board with their Ship's Cannon instead.
Right, yeah, they don't need to, they're not sort of as reliant on getting a weapon to run away with the game. They can do it this other way with this other 2-drop that's a fine card.
There's that wild redundancy again.
That's pretty good. And so the other change to the deck is actually just Death Spite, which is a weapon from Naxxramas. Oh yeah, I mean, Death Spite is great.
I guess I'm still in trash tier in Wild because I very rarely see Pirate Warrior, but I always forget that as a Pirate Warrior you get to play Death Spite. What a disturbing card.
It's a really, really good one. So Death Spite is a 4-mana 4/2 weapon with Death Rattle Whirlwind. So this is, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's just a 4/2 weapon for 4 mana, but that's really good. Yeah. So it comes out a turn earlier than Arcanite Reaper, and it's not really any weaker. I mean, yeah, it's like 1 fewer power, but I think what matters more on these axes is the toughness anyway. That's sort of why cards like Upgrade and Bloodsilk Cultist are so good, is that they buy you an extra, 4 or 5 damage, not an extra 1.
Yeah, you have swing. Having another weapon that you can just go off with, essentially, with these +1/+1 effects in your deck adds to the consistency of the completely unfair way Pirate Warrior wins.
Yeah, totally. And again, weapons are hard to interact with. You have to run dedicated narrow slots to beat them, like Gluttonous Ooze or Acidic Swamp Ooze. And in Wild, people might run Gluttonous Ooze, but they don't run these cards as often because you often have so many other options that are just useful in more situations, so you're not running these narrow hate cards. Mm-hmm. So it's really The deck is very strong and very consistent. It's really a force to be reckoned with. It can punch through taunt walls pretty easy. Even the crazy efficient ones like Deathlord and Sledge Belcher can get through them no problem with weapons and minions. It is a force to be reckoned with. But there's also another familiar deck. So Aggro Druid is present in Wild.
Yeah, this one's the widest, or one of the widest aggro decks.
Definitely, yeah. So the aggro decks, this is certainly the widest. So in Wild, it's called Eggs, and in practice, it's pretty similar to Tokens with some notable differences. So in Wild, the deck leans a little bit more into this stickiness synergy. So in Wild, you have access to some very cheap minions with wonderful death rattle. So Nerubian Egg is one of them, and Haunted Creeper is another. So these are both minions that die and produce other minions. In fact, in both of those cases, they die and produce more power and more toughness.
Yeah, they're both like some of the most efficient. If you just add everything up, Haunted Creeper is a 2-mana 3/4, and Nerubian Egg's a 2-mana 4/6. If you just add up all the total stats.
Yeah, and of course that's not totally correct, but that's still a fine heuristic.
Yeah.
And in this deck, often that's pretty close to correct. So what these decks do is they play out these really sticky minions with these death rattle effects, and then they pump them a bunch with, Mark of the Lotus and Power of the Wild and Savage Roars and stuff like that. And ultimately they create this board that's really hard for you to deal with, that you really need to deal with, but once you wipe it, they actually just still have minions somehow.
Yeah, everything... Yeah, Soul of the Forest is one of the big ones, and then also the new one is the spell that lets you adapt everything. What's that one called?
I don't know what that's called, but I've never seen that run.
Oh, okay, then never mind. But that's something else that seems like it could work. Does the deck run Violet Teacher?
The deck does not run Violet Teacher, no.
Okay.
You might run into some Miracle Rogue decks that do. I haven't seen that yet, because they just have so many other options. But, that is interesting, though, because that's one way to produce minions. But I just think there's so many other ways to do it now. I mean, if the deck wants to play a 5-mana card or a 4-mana card, it'll play Soul of the Forest or Living Mana.
Yeah.
So Soul of the Forest is we've mentioned it a couple times now. That is another card that gives the deck sort of some resiliency. It gives all your minions Death Rattle, summon a 2/2 Trent. So if you have a board of, 1/3s, 2/4s, whatever their stats are, and then you Soul the Forest, your opponent doesn't really want to wipe your board because you might end up with a more threatening board. Or an equally threatening board.
If they leave it out, they keep getting smashed until they lose. They might even just lose the next turn if you have Savage Roar.
Right. So this is a very strong deck. It comes in two flavors that are subtly different. So one of them is a lot more like Tokens in Standard. This one runs Innervates and Enchanted Ravens, Mark of Yasharj, and a few of the other sort of eggs card we mentioned, like Nerubian Egg and Haunted Creeper, etc., etc. And this one tops out at Living Mana. The other one actually does not run Innervate. And it runs Dragon Eggs and Soul of the Forest, and also does not run Mark of Yasharj or Enchanted Raven.
Okay.
So this one is a little bit less about getting out an insane board on turn 1, and a little bit more about, over the course of the first 3 or 4 turns, building out a very strong board.
So maybe a little more combo-y.
A little bit, yeah. It's less all-in. So it sort of...
Dragon Egg.
Yeah, I know. Dragon is so silly.
It sounds so right, though. It's exactly what you want. It's annoying for them to get rid of, and it also makes more minions. It's exactly what you want.
I mean, cards like that are great because once you give them the ability to attack, it actually discourages them from really playing anything. So it in a way really influences their play just because it threatens to make your board better. It threatens to give you more value for free that they have to spend cards on, and the deck is really good at sort of getting you to run out of cards, accomplishing very little.
Does it use Zubat?
It does not run Zubat, but it does run a different robot.
Oh, which one?
Jeeves.
That's not legendary, right? It runs 2?
Yeah, Jeeves is not a legendary card.
Okay, that's funny.
It is funny. I thought it might be legendary too when I heard the name again, but no, it's totally just an average run-of-the-mill Jeeves. So Jeeves is great for this kind of deck.
Do they also use Genzo the Shark now?
No, they have Jeeves.
Okay, so Jeeves... I guess since Jeeves says at the end of your turn, it's more of a guarantee.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean yeah, you don't have to attack. It's not the effect is symmetric, but in a lot of matchups, it's not really symmetric.
Mm-hmm.
If you're facing a control deck, they have no hope of ever getting value off of Jeeves. It's a really great card in the deck, and it's statted reasonably. It's sort of only got 1 power, but it's got 4 toughness, which is hard for your opponent to deal with. So it's a good card.
It sounds like a fun Druid deck, and you just have so much reach with Savage Roar.
Yeah, I mean that's a classic Druid tactic, is to go wide in Savage Roar, and this deck does it well. It's really similar to tokens in Standard.
Oh, I was gonna say Zubat would be great because you got obviously you got Beasts, throw in like Finley, and like the Finja combo, and you got Dragons in the Dragon Egg. You could go off.
Oh,
you could live the dream.
That's cool.
I need to look into this.
That's great. I mean, Wild lets you do stuff like this. Wild gives you access to this sort of card suite that makes wacky cards like Zubat, appealing.
Or just make your finisher Menagerie Magician. That would be, if you get the +6/+6 off of that, that's insane.
It's brutal.
The magical Christmas land.
I mean, it's a great place to live when you're playing card games. So in addition to Pirate Warrior and Druid, there's another notable aggro class, and this one will be perhaps familiar. And this is Aggro Shaman. So you can imagine how this deck goes. So on turn 1 they play Tunnel Trog, on turn 2 they play Totem Golem, and on turn 3 they coin out Feral Spirit. And then once you've somehow managed to deal with their incredibly overstated board, they may have played a 4-mana 7/7, and if they haven't, they're just throwing Lava Bursts and Jade Lightnings at your face.
And Crackle.
And Crackle.
That was a card I was recently thinking that what a degenerate card. What oh no, don't play that on me.
No, not my face.
Crackle. I think about things I don't miss about Wild, or don't miss about old formats. And Crackle was not losing. There were some games where losing to that felt really bad. Where the only way to lose was the 7, the hero power into the Wrath of Air into the max number, and they just get there and you're like, wow, all right,
Hearthstone,
cool.
I love this game.
But it's a strong card.
It's a strong card, and it's in a strong deck. So the strategy, unlike Pirate Warrior and Druid, which are both trying to invest in either weapons or minions that are going to stick around, this deck is actually investing in overstated minions in an early game and trying to push through a little damage and close the game out with burn spells once you've managed to deal with their board. So its plan shifts over the course of the game from sticking minions and attacking with them to just throwing spells at your face.
And because of the burn, if you try to be well, here's my big guy, and I can use my big guy to clear your board, they're just it's gone now, and I can smack your face again. They can just melt. If you try to play a threat, they can just melt it without even spending that much mana on it.
Absolutely. If they're not throwing it at your face, they can throw it at your minions to maintain early board control. Cards like Jade Lightning and Jade Claws just give them extra value and extra board presence. It's a really strong deck. It plays a lot like Aggro Shaman did in Standard in Gadgets and Mean Streets. So prior to rotation at the end of the Year of the Kraken.
Do you ever see people using Twilight Hammer Twilight?
So it actually showed up in the Wild Open. I don't remember which player was using it, but yeah, people were jamming that card.
The back in the day, obviously you would never consider using that card because you got Doomhammer and the 1-mana Rockbiter weapon.
Right.
The Wild's not that wild. Wild does not use the old text of the card, so that would also be an interesting format. But ultimately, Hammer of Twilight is like Deathspite, but you get a pretty fat minion. A 4/2 is pretty scary.
Yeah, absolutely. If a 4/2 goes unanswered, it can definitely smack your face a few times and make the game hard to win.
It is value that you can get out of your weapon even if your opponent destroys it, which is definitely can be frustrating if you're on the other side, like your opponent plays a Twilight Hammer of Twilight, and on your turn you're looking at your ooze, like I can kill it, but then they get this giant elemental thing.
Yeah, that goes back to why Druid is so strong. It's something that either it creates inevitability or sort of deters you from interacting with it. That's really good. So this is a really strong deck. It's a fast, proactive deck, and it can definitely check you if you're going to try to play a really greedy strategy like a control strategy.
Or just kill all your guys if you're trying to play an aggressive strategy. It's really it could pretty much be all around hard to beat.
Yeah, between cheap interaction, very efficient minions, it's hard to tango with this deck on the board. Feral Spirit's so good
against Pirate Warrior. That's one of your big cards.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, back in Mean Streets, that was a card I was so happy to see in my opener. There was some contention. I've definitely seen some posts arguing against it, but I kept that every time, and I had a really high win rate in that matchup. So I think I was probably correct.
It sounds right to me.
Anyway, so there's also a number of combo decks that are in Wild. Yeah. So Crystal Rogue is one of them.
Hey!
Yeah, why don't you tell us about that one?
Okay, so if you've ever seen Crystal Rogue in a Standard, it's pretty much exactly the same thing. There's like barely anything different. There's a lot of lists do have Target Dummy, which is a 0 mana 0/2 taunt, and it's also a mech. And that can basically function as a 5/5 taunt for 0 after you've gotten your quest off. You can also do something cute, which I did play around with, which is playing Gang Up on patches and putting a bunch of patches in your deck, and the next time you play a Pirate, you get 3 patches, and if you've completed your quest, you just got 15 damage for free out of your deck. So that's definitely strong. Not that strong. You can also just use it as sort of like a 3 damage lightning bolt, like an arc lightning that you get to divide up if you need to do something early game, something defensive early game. I was playing against a mage, and I got a Manic Soulcaster off of my Swashbuckler, and I put my copy of patches in my deck with the Manic Soulcaster. So there's more than one way to do this, but that's definitely not the consistent way to do it. But it's definitely best games are against control decks, because just like in Standard, 5/5 after 5/5 after 5/5, eventually they run out of ways to stop you. But it certainly can also put up a good game against any of the aggro decks as long as it doesn't get run over too quickly. And that's what a lot of the cards in your deck are trying to do, like Glacial Shard, one of your favorite cards to have against an aggro deck just to buy time.
Yeah, it's very strong. So,
I've been experimenting with a lot. Even though there's certain cards that you have to use 2 of every time in Quest Rogue, I think there's a lot of different ways to build it and play it that are viable.
Yeah, like Murlocs.
Yes, like Murlocs. I tried a Murloc variant. I'm trying to really look for good ways to abuse Discover, to try and discover minions that have the same name, taking advantage of the fact that I'm more likely to discover a rogue class card. So one of my thoughts was Journey below. But ultimately there's so many rogue-specific Death Rattle minions, there's like 4 or 5, that it would not be a consistent thing. Another thing that I tried which didn't work out was Mech Quest Rogue, using the Gorilla Bot, and Target Dummy, of course, and Annoyatron, pretty good as a 5/5.
Sure.
But you know what I wished was a mech was Ship's Cannon. I think if Ship's Cannon were a mech, then Mech Pirate Crystal Rogue would be very good. And I would be all over that. I guess I could try like a very piratey Crystal Rogue, but I think sometimes people judge it as a very shallow deck. I think there's a lot more depth to it in Wild.
Certainly, the card pool's bigger.
Yeah, I think you have more creative ways to slow down an aggressive deck, and so that gives the rest of your deck more breathing room to try different things.
Right. So
are there any other combo decks?
Definitely. So there's a little bit of Inner Fire Priest. I mean, this is maybe less degenerate than Quest Rogue, but still very strong.
Okay.
And in In Wild, it has access to Deathlord and Velen's Chosen. These are two cards that are obviously very good in this deck.
Ooh, yeah. Velen's Chosen's nice.
Yeah, another way to sort of pump up your minions, and if you're running Holy Nova, makes it a little stronger. You're running any board wipe effects, makes it stronger. Deathlord's obviously just a huge and cheap minion that can slow your opponent down, or just be recipient of your Inner Fires and Divine Spirits. I think.
Yep, I see that.
Yeah, it's very strong. But otherwise functions pretty similar to the standard version. It's just the standard version with a few of the slots switched out for some better cards. A really big one is Freeze Mage.
Yeah, of course, because it's got Ice Lance.
It's got our Hall of Fame Ice Lance. Yeah, so Freeze Mage is very strong in Wild. It has all of the tools that have been printed to be a Freeze Mage, to Ice Lance your opponent, to burn them down, and slow the game down, and try to assemble lethal in hand. There's Emperor Thaurissan, which is very powerful in this deck.
Yeah, if you only know really recent Standard Hearthstone, Emperor Thaurissan is huge in Freeze Mage, and one of the reasons why Wild Freeze Mage is so unfair. He's a legendary 6-mana 5/5 that at the end of your turn makes every card in your hand permanently cost 1 less. So this makes your ability to go off with Ice Lances and Frostbolts much greater, or trying to get a ton of Fireballs off Archmage Antonidas, also much easier. All of your 1-mana spells become 0 cost. I don't know if anyone uses Malygos anymore, but that's another way to abuse Emperor Thaurissan, where Malygos would not have really been able to get you any damage the turn it came out at 9 mana, and a bunch of spells at their normal costs. After Emperor Thaurissan makes Malygos 8, and some of your spells 0 or 1, that's another way to just do obscene damage all in one turn.
Yeah, so Thaurissan's definitely useful for enabling degenerate combos, and has been in multiple decks, and Freeze Mage is of course no exception.
Yeah, Freeze Mage really likes that card. There's also Mad Scientist, which makes guaranteeing that you have the ice block and guaranteeing your extra turns to finish the game off. It takes it from being a probability or a chance to a guarantee.
Yeah, Mad Scientist is very good because also you don't ever have to spend the 3 mana on the secret. It just puts it out for you.
Yes, that's huge.
It's very, very big. I mean, Arcanologist is good, and there are some Freeze Mage lists that even run 1 to 2 Arcanologists, but Mad Scientist might even just be enough. So this deck is very strong. And also, another interesting tech is Evolved Kobold.
Yes. That's another way, especially with Emperor Thaurissan, to just burst out a ton of damage.
Yeah, so this is an unassuming little card. 4 mana 2/2 with spell damage +2. So Freeze Mage, when it's on the turn where it's winning, it's often casting many spells, and so spell damage plus minions are more impactful when you're casting multiple spells. So this is a deck that's trying to cast several Frostbolts and several Ice Lances in one turn, and all of them are getting spell damage +2. So this little guy, this little 4 mana thing, can often add 8 plus damage to your combo. It's just another Fireball or better.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. And that's obviously very powerful. So
especially with Emperor Thaurissan, or with cheap burn that you've gotten off of Primordial Glyphs. Like if you have some 0 mana Frostbolts lying around, suddenly 0 mana for 5 damage. So he can, if you really just accumulate a lot of cheap cards, he can easily be adding more than 2 Fireballs or 2 Fireballs worth of damage.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. So actually, speaking of Primordial Glyph, there was somebody in the Wild Open who made a really interesting play. On an early turn of the game, they Primordial Glyphed and took a Molten Reflection. And then later in the game, they played Evolved Kobold, Molten Reflection on it, and then lethaled the opponent. Yeah, spicy.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were going to say something about Archmage.
No. But you're doing something even cooler than that.
Well, no, I mean, it is cooler, but winning is definitely better.
That's definitely true.
That definitely sounds nasty. I mean, did he also have Emperor that game?
I do not remember.
Because that'd be
but I think he did.
filthy. Because the kobold would become 3, and the molten reflection would become 1 mana. So it'd be 4 mana for the 4 spell damage.
It's very likely that an Emperor happened at some point.
Yeah, Freeze Mage is really it's such a classic combo idea. There's like a puzzle. And somehow all these things add up to your opponent's life total. You just have to figure out how.
Yeah, it's
and Evolved Kobold is another way to find an answer to the puzzle.
Yeah, just having these sort of one-off minions in the deck that can make it easier for you to win. These one-off cards that can make the game easier to end. It's just really valuable. The deck is actually so. Freeze Mage has some natural counters. I mean, honestly, Freeze Mage is a deep enough and old enough deck in Hearthstone that it probably deserves its own episode at some point.
We'll do that at some point. Maybe it doesn't seem appropriate during the summer.
No, definitely not. Well, it's winter somewhere. But it's got a few natural counters. Control Warrior being the classic one, where they can just beat you by playing 0 cards and hero powering every turn. That matchup is almost unwinnable. But another matchup that's like really, 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 really terrible is Reno Mage. So
yeah,
I mean, Ice Block just really ruins your day when you're trying to have exactly 30 damage.
Ice Block Reno.
Yeah, Ice Block Reno, because then your opponent has like 59-ish health. And that's just not enough. You just, your deck has a hard time with that. You can always Alexstrasza and try again with some of the other spells in deck, but it just means you have to have more gas, and they have ways of dealing with that as well. So it's a tricky matchup to win. You kind of have to get really lucky. Yeah,
it's ultimately the cards in the Freeze Mage deck. Many of them are simply to buy time. They don't do anything on their own. Like Frost Nova doesn't actually produce anything besides tempo and time. And when they have all the time in the world because they have a card out that says they can't get killed, and if you get past it, they go back to full health. Now you just need a lot of stuff, and you'll go through a lot of the cards in your deck, and their cards are so high value, like Kazakus. Like, the value out of that one card is astronomical, and your deck is full of Frost Novas and Doomsayers and things that don't actually do anything. So that makes it such a difficult game to win.
Yeah, it's tough because they have a lot of cards that will make the game unwinnable for you, and both players need a lot of time to get their stuff together, but they can just more easily assemble the way to lock you out of the game than you can assemble the end of the game. And your Frost Novas and your Doomsayers are just not very good against them because they don't need to play any threats.
They're not trying to assemble a board.
Yeah, they have the upper hand. I mean, at some point in the game, they can start playing a threat, every couple turns, and you'll have to deal with it somehow. You'll have to waste time and mana to deal with it, and they can just sort of keep playing it, and they don't need to hurry. They can just do it at any time they want. So that's a tough one to win. But the deck is, Freeze Mage is still really powerful in Wild. It's very strong. So let's move into mid-range. There are some really interesting mid-range strategies. One that we sort of alluded to a lot is this mid-range Paladin. So the mid-range Paladin deck is built around Silver Hand Recruit synergy. And,
to battle.
To battle. Reporting for duty. So what this deck is trying to do is play cards like Lost in the Jungle or Muster for Battle or Stand Against Darkness, and then play a Quartermaster, which gives all of your Silver Hand recruits +2/+2, or play a Light Fused Stegodon, which adapts all of your Silver Hand recruits, or it's trying to play Sunkeeper Tarim, and then just assemble a board of nice, 3/3s, or sort of 3/3-ish minions, and sort of beat the opponent down.
Well,
so
one of the things that makes this such an effective strategy is because you don't need to commit too much to, like, even if you need to do it in 2 turns, like one turn assemble, next turn pump, you don't need to risk too much. Like, you got your hero power will always contribute 1, which is no risk, and then everything is really efficient. Like Muster for Battle, extremely efficient card. Making 3 guys and giving you a weapon even if they have the answer, you still get the weapon. The Lost in Jungle is only 1 mana, so you're barely committing any mana. So if they have an answer, it's not the end of the world. And then Stand Against Darkness is just really efficient. and you're only committing one card, and if you do get there, that's sort of the big risk, big reward one. But its payoff is massive.
Oh yeah.
So even though maybe it's the highest risk of all of them, if you look at how much reward you get per risk, it's still a really, really, really good deal. They're all they're all appealing, really, no matter what your opponent has.
Yeah, definitely, and that gives the deck its own sort of resilience, because if you develop a board of 1/1s, through just iterative hero powers or Lost in the Jungles or Stand Against Darkness or whatever, and your opponent really has to answer it because you're just threatening to turn it into something huge and terrifying.
Yeah, there's always that looming threat that, like, I know these are just 1/1s, but who knows? God only knows what they're going to be next turn.
Right.
So they can never, even though it's only 1/1s, they still have to treat it like a big problem.
So because of that, maybe you just hero powered for 3 or 4 turns, and your opponent needs to blow a removal spell, and they wipe your entire board. Then you could just refill immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes the deck so strong, is that, like, you turn these 1/1s into game-ending minions, just a bunch of minions that your opponent can't possibly tango with, and it's so easy for you to just rebuild that board right away after they wipe it. I mean, they could, if you have 10 mana, they can wipe your board. You could just Stand Against Darkness and Quartermaster, and you have a terrifying board again.
Yeah, and like, if they get past all that again, then you just like, all right, Tyrion.
Yeah, right, Tyrion, deal with that. Okay, and then you just play your other 1/1s. So another important card in this deck is Steward of Darkshire. Yeah, so this one's really great. This allows you to set up sort of multi-turn combos where you play a bunch of 1/1s and then you Quartermaster. So 3 mana, 3/3 that whenever you summon a 1 health minion, you give it Divine Shield. So it turns all of your Silverhand recruits into Ardent Squires. Ardent Squire is really good.
That gives you much better odds at having a board the next turn. They basically need double whatever they would have normally had.
Yeah, and they often just don't have that.
Very often.
Or they'll just they realize that they have to have it, you make them have it, and then they blow 2 removal spells on your board of 1/1s, and you're just in a great spot if that's what your opponent has to do the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
So the deck is really strong. The deck is able to the deck is able to sort of convert these cards into game-winning value, these one-off cards, by just using the sort of lock and key Quartermaster plus Silver Handmaker, or Light Fuse Tegadon plus Silver Handmaker, and it has a very threatening hero power that your opponent just has to deal with. They have to take time and mana off to deal with the 1/1s that you're producing. It's a very resilient, very strong deck.
Does it I was gonna ask about a certain card. Oh, the Steadfast Steed, Light Fused, what? It's the 6 mana.
Spikeridge Steed?
Spikeridge Steed, yes.
Oh, yeah, totally. Spikeridge Steed's insane.
Okay. Yeah,
you run
okay.
2.
Yeah, so that's just another, like, Tyrion 2 and 3.
Yeah, it's basically, the deck has, it has a lot of, the classic mid-range tools that we have in Standard, but it just has a Silver Hand theme instead of a Murloc theme.
Mm-hmm.
So,
that's a good way to look at it.
Enablers are Lost in the Jungle hero power, Muster for Battle, and Stand Against Darkness, and the payoffs are Light Fuse Stegadon, Quartermaster, and Sunkeeper Tarm. So all of these are basically the same card. Runs 2 Stonehill Defenders, which are, of course, Tarm's 2 and 3, always.
If you're lucky, yeah.
And not by always I mean not always, but so it's a strong, resilient deck that can win it at most stages of the game. Because the other thing that we just haven't really mentioned is that, like, if you're pumping out a lot of minions, you can tango with your opponent if they're trying to play aggro.
Yeah, and Stonehill Defender is inherently good against aggro. Plus, if you're playing Stonehill Defender in Wild, that means you can discover Sludge Belcher.
Oh yeah, Sludge Belcher is really good.
Or Deathlord. Or Deathlord.
The deck also has Shielded Minibot.
Mm.
That's a good one. In case you missed that one.
Red alert. Shield up.
Yep, that's a familiar sound.
Yeah, I mean, really, if you don't know much about older Hearthstone cards in Wild and don't know why this Silverhand recruit strategy would necessarily be good, is mostly Muster for Battle. And then right next to that, and slightly below it, Quartermaster.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen, the Murlocs doing Gentle Megasaur, that's that Slight Fuse Stegodon.
Yeah, it's really similar. So I mean, Muster for Battle has always been just one of the most efficient cards in Paladin. You know, when you could play it, it's just one of the best tempo plays you could possibly make.
Yeah, it's great against aggro and so hard for control to clear 3/1/1s.
Yeah, efficiently. They're always going to be trading down in mana, and they really have to. I mean, if they let you have that, you could just coin out Quartermaster and the game could be over. So in addition to this Paladin deck, which is really cool, it's actually doing very well according to the Vicious Syndicate Wild Meta Report. There's also mid-range Shaman strategies. That's not too surprising. A mid-range Shaman had a pretty terrifying run in Standard for a very long time, and it's basically the same deck in Wild. It can be, you know, a little bit faster in the sort of aggressive direction by running more burn and like maybe some 4-mana 7/7s, but it can also be a little bit slower with some more Jade synergies like Eye of Blackpaw or something from below. It's ultimately a strong mid-range deck, and I mean Shaman's just a nice, versatile, strong class that has a lot of tools, a lot of the best tools that's ever been given in Wild.
Yeah, it sounds like Stonehill Defender could be worth using.
Yeah, totally. Aim from below is good.
Yeah, the extra things are just so fantastic.
So another mid-range deck I wanted to mention that I've been playing in the past couple days is Dragon Priest.
Yeah, that's got Azure Drake.
Yeah, so it has Azure Drake, which is sort of an old Flame Hall of Fame card, but it also has Twilight Guardian and Wormrest Agent.
Yep.
And of course, the most important dragon, Draconid Operative.
Yeah, that's for an operative, surprisingly obvious.
Yeah, totally. Secret agent coming through. I really love that.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. So Dragon Priest is great. It's this mid-range deck that just tangos really well with control decks because it can often just outvalue them.
Its minions are so efficient.
Yeah, they all draw a card. It's insane.
A lot of the cards that are best against the control decks are in their decks, and Draconid Operative can hook you up. Like you can get ice blocks against the Freeze Mage, for example. I think that's the best example how you can really just hose people using this deck. Any Shaman deck, you can get their Maelstrom Portals or their Lightning Storms, and they're definitely going to be running a minion-based strategy, at least with totems. So that's going to be good against them. There's a bunch of examples of that. Really, just any control deck, you can also get some of their best threats. To then be like, can you deal with Tyrian Forgery, Mr. Paladin?
yeah, that's obviously super strong. So I think we should move into our next topic now. But do you have anything more to add about Wild?
About Wild, it really is not like figured out. That's one of the things that has been giving me such a good time with it. Is that my innovations to even something like Quest Rogue have felt relevant, and I've been finding new ways to go. Too often with decks and Standard, I want to go a certain way, and there just aren't enough cards that do that plan. You know, I come like, oh, this plan might work, and then you try to assemble the plan, and you're like, there's holes in your plan. And there's so many more ways to fill those gaps in Wild and really make the deck that you want to make. So that's just a really fun thing as like a player and deck designer about Wild for me. So if you're considering getting into it, even if you don't have that big of a Wild collection or anything, I still recommend giving it a try for that reason. And it, one of my other fears about Wild, because I hadn't been playing it really at all until this month, since Ungoro came out, I had been so focused on Standard. And I assumed that Wild would be even faster and even more punishing than Standard. But I actually feel it's the opposite.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's slower.
So many of the cards are so good. No deck can just count on, getting 15 damage in early and you stumbling and not being able to stop them from doing the other 15 damage. Like, if you're playing a control deck, you're not going to stumble. You're going to play a Sludge Belcher or an Anti-Heal Bot or a Reno Jackson. So just like sort of cheesily trying to jam damage with a Vicious Fledgling is not legitimate in Wild, even though it is in Standard. So it's actually less punishing and it's more forgiving. So that's just another thing that makes deck building more fun and playing more fun in Wild.
I agree. I think that the control decks are very powerful, and the early game control-ish cards like Sludge Belcher or Death Lord are also really, really powerful and prevalent in Wild. And it is a brewer's paradise, like you were saying. I mean, we said pretty early on that it's not solved. It is pretty young. It's not received a whole lot of attention in the spotlight just yet. You could start playing Wild and come up with a wacky strategy and not only win games, you might even be able to climb Legend, and you might even come up with a strategy that survives people knowing about it, you know? And that's success.
There's
that's
more space for that in Wild because there's so few. There's way fewer people trying to do that. Plus, like there's fewer people with the expertise because there's a lot of cards to look at. There's a lot to consider, and it's another advantage of it not being solved is you won't just queue against Pirate Warrior every game. It's nothing like that. The variety of decks I play against is vast.
Yeah, I think the prevalence of Pirate Warriors actually dropped pretty substantially in the last couple weeks, which is nice.
Yeah, I haven't been playing against it. I've been running with the 0 Galaka Crawlers in my Quest Rogue deck in Wild. I originally was thinking of Curator for that card actually, but after not playing against any Pirate Warriors, that card never came in and just stuck as Stone Tusk Boar.
Stone Tusk Boar is pretty good.
Best card in Magic the Gathering.
So let's move on to our next topic. I think it'll be relatively quick compared to the entire Wild metagame. We wanted to to talk about
that's thorough.
A small piece of the Wild metagame, specifically the piece that ought to be in Standard but is not. That is the Hall of Fame.
It's a very new idea, really, for card games in general. There's really nothing like this in Magic.
Yeah, this is a little bit like a ban list, I think.
Yeah, I guess it is.
So this is, Sylvanas, Ragnaros, Icelance, Conceal, Azure Drake, and Power Overwhelming. These are cards that are in Classic or Basic, but cannot be played in Standard. So they can only be played in Wild. They were removed from Standard to open up design space. So these are often cards that found themselves in any deck, in the case of Azure Drake, Sylvanas, Ragnaros. Pretty much, if you were playing a deck that was trying to win in the late game, you wanted to run 2 to 3 of those. And Icelance is just a card that makes Freeze Mage very, very powerful, and there are some environments where Freeze Mage could be degenerate. Conceal is a card that makes Miracle strategies very powerful, where they can just, make a crazy strong end the game in 1 attack minion and then make it impossible to interact with. And Power Overwhelming is a card that enables combo damage from hand with like Leroy, Faceless Manipulator, Power Overwhelming, and Thorsan, and that can, end the game.
Yeah, that's in the case of Power Overwhelming. The main problem is that there can be the absence of interaction if people are just doming each other for 20 or 30 out of nowhere. That's not what Blizzard wants. Blizzard wants this back and forth. So do we. So that's why they didn't want Power Overwhelming. And it also limited. They probably want to make more maybe demons with charge or something like that. Demons with cool death rattles and warlock, and they would just be too good with Power Overwhelming and Standard, so they wouldn't be able to make them. Taking it out of Standard allows them to make those cards.
Right.
And then that's sort of the thing behind Icelance and Conceal. If they make some powerful, cheap spells in Mage and Rogue, it's almost guaranteed that in Standard, Freeze Mage would be the absolute best Mage deck, and Miracle Rogue would be the absolute best Rogue deck, and they might just be the 2 best decks, period.
Right.
And so that limits their ability to make fun, cheap spells in those classes. And so their solution was to take them out of standard. Now they were able to make Primordial Glyph. Certainly would not be remotely fun to think about that card with Ice Lance around in standard.
Yeah, no way.
And I'm sure there'd be some sort of Conceal Vicious Fledgling deck or something like that.
I didn't even want to think about that. I hadn't even considered that until now. That's gross.
It's really, like, just terrible, terrible things to be happening with these cards that are still really good. You know, Vicious Fledgling and Primordial Glyph have proven to be, like, maybe almost too good, but definitely really strong. But they could never have printed them and never have pushed those limits if Ice Lance and Conceal were around. So that's why it's really good that these cards were put into Hall of Fame. And yeah, Sylvanas Rags and Azure Drake just raised a question, like, why play a card at those costs besides those cards when they're just so good?
Yeah, it's definitely it definitely gives you a little bit of insight into their design process that they chose these cards, but it suggests that they're thinking very thoroughly about the cards they make, which is good. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to ask, what would happen if these were in Standard? And I think we had a brief discussion about this before we started recording, and I think the consensus is that Standard might not be very different.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, when we made the first episode, for example, I was, like, just so absorbed by the Hall of Fame and the impact it was going to have in Standard. And now I'm trying to think of what the impact would be without it, and I don't know if there'd be anything at all, honestly. Well, or at least with the neutral cards. I'm talking mostly about the neutral cards. Should clarify that. We just went over why those class-specific cards would be ridiculous, or at least Ice Lance and Conceal. So I would say those two being legal would actually be quite impactful. But the part I was surprised at myself about is how Sylvanas Rags and Azure Drake seem so irrelevant right now, when, like, a month ago they seemed super relevant, or 2 months ago they seemed like the biggest deal in the world.
Yeah, I agree. So, Sylvanas, like, that's one of those cards that's really good in certain matchups. In other matchups it's kind of just a 6-mana 5/5 that, like 6-mana 5/5 Haunted Creeper or something. But and in this current metagame, Sylvanas is a lot more like the latter case. So a lot of decks are winning by producing wide boards with a lot of small, tough to tango with minions like 2/3s and 2/4s. So Sylvanas is really terrible against those boards because you spend your entire turn 6 playing a 5/5 that your opponent attacks right past. You gained nothing.
Yeah, she doesn't do well with small, insignificant minions. She wants big, significant minions. Or big, significant minion, singular, ideally.
And Ragnaros is actually kind of the same thing.
Yep. It gets completely hosed by wide boards. Even some of the slower mid-range or control decks are going wide, like mid-range Paladin or Control Paladin. Really goes heavy on the hero power. They might have Lost in the Jungle, so they're ready for random 8 damage. We even know that from Sulfuris how ready they are for Ragnaros, and I think Sylvanas would be the same thing. The only impact on them is they'd have to be a bit more careful about their Tyrians.
Yeah, definitely.
And then even Azure Drake would probably be the most impactful of the 3, partly because it's the least expensive, but also because a lot of decks are just looking for certain cards. Like, certainly Dragon Priest would love Azure Drake.
Yeah, mid-range Shaman would probably like it too.
And there's strong mage decks like Gunther Mage, which are playing lots of 2/3s and do really like their minions. So having another minion to get value would probably it would be great in those decks, but it's certainly not Primordial Glyph for Arcanologist.
Yeah, certainly not.
All the very impactful things are really cheap or do much bigger, wider things than Sylvanas Rags and Azure Drake, like Living Mana. I definitely was like, what's Druid gonna do on 5 mana? Druid had been running double Azure Drake for months and months and months. And now it's like, why play Azure Drake? Like, there's living mana. Have you seen this card? And I totally was not looking at it like that 2 months ago. I was like still in love with Azure Drake, and only starting to realize, hey, wait a minute, this living mana thing is really, really unfair.
Yeah, Azure Drake shored up a cost slot in a lot of sort of medium to slow decks, and it also made Curator very strong. So that was something I was a little worried about with the removal of Azure Drake. I actually thought it would be a pretty big Curator nerf, and I think it was. Mm-hmm. But I think that a lot of decks were able to replace the Dragon part of Curator with Primordial Drake, so the ones that want to run Curator will just run that. Though I do think that if Azure Drake were in the format, Curator might be used a little bit more widely. So some of the more mid-rangey kind of decks that have a good beast target, would also have a dragon target they might want. Because something like, in the right shaman build, maybe if you were trying to do some kind of totem synergy, but also play kind of a slow game, you might not want to play something like Primordial Drake.
Yeah, because if it kills your totems, generally you don't want it in shaman. But some decks love Primordial Drake. Particularly Druid. Not even looking for Curator or anything, but Jade Druid, which had been running the Azure Drakes to dig through the deck and deal more damage with its spells, is now just slamming a Primordial Drake that does the damage on its own off the battle cry. And a 4/8 taunt is massive. That was something I very much underestimated. It's like, what do you do about a 4/8 taunt?
Oh yeah, I've seen so many concedes after I play that thing.
But yeah, there's also like Murloc Paladin decks that have Curator that probably would like more dragon targets, but don't want more than one Primordial Drake, or maybe not any.
Right.
So it helped with those as well. But Azure Drake, it doesn't do enough on the board.
Not right now.
When it comes out.
You can't. It's for the same reason it's hard to just play 5/5 for 6 mana. It's tough to play 4/4 for 5 mana.
And like the kind of deck that Azure Drake beats is like a control deck. Like, oh, now I need to deal with this 4/4 plus it replaced itself. Like, that's hard to beat as a control deck, as a fatigue deck. Guess what's not in standard? Fatigue decks, because of people like me playing Quest Rogue. We talked last time about how big of an impact that's having on standard.
Yeah.
And one of the results is the absence of these fatigue decks, and that's the kind of a fatigue deck would be a reason to play Azure Drake, and those don't exist. So that's another reason why, if Azure Drake suddenly stepped out of the Hall of Fame, probably wouldn't really do much. Like, it would do a little bit, but it wouldn't be like Ice Lance.
Yeah,
I think that's probably the biggest one.
Yes,
it
definitely
would make Hearthstone a lot less bearable if Ice Lands are in standard.
So we can think about this methodically, or at least speculate about it methodically. So I think, obviously Freeze Mage becomes very strong because it's a good deck right now, and it would become a lot better if it had Ice Lance. That would incentivize people to play slower warrior decks, so maybe Taunt Warrior or just straight out Control Warrior, which would probably enhance the strength of a deck like Quest Rogue. It would make Quest Rogue a better play.
And Quest Rogue would run Eater's Secrets more.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Absolutely.
I just double Eater's Secrets in every Quest Rogue deck. I actually have 2 in mine in standard right now. I've been seeing so many mages.
Yeah, mages. Mages floats between the most commonly to one of the most common archetypes up in the relatively high ranks. So it's a fine tech. It makes a lot of sense.
It also feels so good when you get them. Oh, yeah.
I can only imagine.
They're just sitting on the ice block, and they think they have another turn, and they don't.
They don't.
And you just kill them. It's all worth it for that. It's worth it when you're sitting against a Kor'kron Elite, and you're I can pay 4 mana for a 2/4.
Oh, that's so bad.
Real good.
So I think I agree with you. I think we're pretty much in agreement that Ice Lance would be the most impactful of these.
It would also make just something that maybe Freeze Mage can have trouble against, like a really fast aggressive deck like Pirate Warrior or Aggro Hunter, more viable. Something that's got more like direct face damage rather than being completely hosed by Frost Nova like Aggro Druid is.
Right.
Something like with the weapons or with the reach of Hunter cards. And that would also, those decks would also be more likely to be good if Quest Rogue starts showing up because of the Control Warriors.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So that'd sort of be like the four forces. The one main one, which is the Freeze Mage, the deck's trying to beat Freeze Mage, and then the deck's trying to beat that deck.
So I think that one of the morals here is, we're talking about how we think that if the Hall of Fame cards were in Standard, it might not be that impactful. So there's several caveats there. First of all, the caveat 0 is that we might just be wrong.
Yeah.
That's obviously completely possible. But also, this isn't to say that they shouldn't have removed these cards or that these cards are not overpowered. That's not the purpose of the Hall of Fame. We had mentioned right at the beginning, this opens up design space for them. This allows them to print certain types of cards that they normally could not print. So it's a good thing for Hearthstone, even if it's not super important now. Maybe in a year, we'll be like, wow, it's a really good thing Ragnaros is not in Standard.
Mm-hmm. It opens up design space for making a deck as a player, too. It's possible that the Aggro Druid strategy with Living Mana would never have been discovered if people just continued to jam 2 Azure Drakes as their 5-drops.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's it tells us that, this isn't, it's not really a value-oriented metagame that we're in. It's kind of a tempo, get out early board control type meta. Mm-hmm. That standard is all about controlling the board, and games are won from the board, and you want to just have minions out, and if you're the last one to stick a threat, you're probably going to win.
And from a very early turn, like from turn 1, like if it's just about winning the board, but you start counting the turns on turn 5, then Azure Drake, Sylvanas, and Rags are actually where you want to be. But we're starting from turn 0. Where you got to floor it from the moment the game starts, with things like Vicious Fledgling coming out the first turn and N'Zoth's first mate and similar things. Even Token Shaman will quickly assemble a board, and if you're not putting your foot on the gas in the beginning, keeping up with them, you're not going to have a shot.
Yeah, a lot of these decks are they got a cab to catch on turn 6, and the cab goes to the next game. So
yeah, so it doesn't. You can look at the Sylvan Rags in your hand, and even the Azure Drake on your board as they attack your face.
Right. So, I think we could probably wrap up there. How do you feel about that?
Well, as far as Conceal goes,
we didn't talk much about that.
Yeah, like I mentioned, like the Schnag with Vicious Fledgling. Though honestly, like Miracle Rogue is a good deck right now.
Right.
So if it had Conceal, it probably would be a problem. Because Miracle Rogue, that rogue is sneaky. Inherently has a pretty good game against decks that are trying to assemble minions really fast because they backstab. Right. And they have the hero power, SI7 Agent, Eviscerate, Phantom Knives. They can afford to run all these cards because eventually all of them make them draw a card. Yes. That's how the deck works. They just get to throw all these cards in their deck that give them all this control over the early game. They have a lot of control over what lives and what dies, and how much damage they are taking in via their hero power. They also have the new 2-mana 2/2 that gives them the 1 damage, which can be really good for having a body, having a spell to draw a card, triggering combo. So they would inherently have a pretty good game against a lot of these wider aggressive decks. Even Shaman, they can immediately kill the Mana Tide Totem with the Flame Tongue Totem. They have a very good way to make their wide board irrelevant, even if they can't clear it easily. Right. So if it also had Conceal to make it hard for any control deck to beat, it could be pretty powerful. Would it be better than Quest Rogue, though? I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to know.
But Miracle Rogue might even be better than Quest Rogue right now. It's hard to say, but it certainly opens up more doors for these degenerate make a really big board and go from their strategies. Right now, Druid does it, Shaman does it, Pirate Warrior kind of does it. Maybe Rogue would also be doing it if it had Conceal.
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely make it a little easier for those decks to work and sort of assemble a board that will win the following turn and just be able to protect it.
Like Violet Teacher Conceal is also very good.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a card we haven't seen that hasn't seen a lot of play lately, but it's very strong with Conceal.
I could easily see some kind of almost mid-rangey Rogue deck with Conceals, Shaku, Violet Teachers, Cold Blood, and Vicious Fledglings. And it just, Vicious Fledgling Conceal, and then next turn, play a card, Cold Blood your Vicious Fledgling, attack.
Yeah.
You see where this is going. It's really, really awful, actually.
Yeah, nobody really wants to live in the Conceal Vicious Fledgling world.
Yeah, so I think that Conceal is probably the second most impactful. We also didn't talk about Power Overwhelming. Maybe that's a sign about what we think about it.
Yeah, I think that's...
Didn't talk much about it either, though... It maybe of the 6 cards, it's the one that deserves to be in. Because poor Warlock, right?
Yeah, I mean, Warlock's in a bad spot right now, but, we haven't seen all of the cards that they've slated for printing in future sets, so whether or not it should be here is not a question we're prepared to answer, but it would definitely help Warlock because they're just in a terrible spot.
Yeah, if we were to take a short-sighted, all we know is what we know now, would putting any of the Hall of Fame cards back in Standard help Standard? Maybe Power Overwhelming. If
right.
One of them, it'd be Power Overwhelming. Considering how fast and unfair all these other decks are, I don't see Power Overwhelming pushing Warlock past any of them. I think it actually could be an excellent way for Warlock to be able to keep up. And also, Power Overwhelming, I think, is considerably less scary as a combo piece without Emperor Thaurissan around.
Yeah, I feel like that too. So, yeah, definitely. But again, it's hard to know with what, they haven't printed all of the cards they're planning yet.
I still am super glad that all 6 are where they are. Because I think it's already paid off. I think we've already seen really cool stuff that they did only because those cards are there. And yeah, we're probably going to, hopefully in the near future, be more thankful that cards like Sylvanas and Azure Drake are gone. Hopefully that will be more relevant soon.
Yeah. So, about wrapping up now.
I'm totally ready for a wrap.
Okay.
Tomato, preferably. Or basil.
Yeah, with both or some mozzarella. That sounds great.
I'm in.
Yeah, some margarita pizza. Ooh. Anyway, so thank you guys for joining us. There's a lot of places you can find us now. So we recently expanded our representation on the internet. So as usual, you can find us on Twitter at LastTurnHS. You can also find us on Facebook. Just search Last Turn. You'll find us.
Are we at Last Turn HS on Facebook?
I think we are.
Yeah. You managed to snag that for us. So.
Oh yeah. Yes, that's really good. On SoundCloud, you can, as usual, soundcloud.com/lastturn. You can find us on Google Play and now iTunes. That's a big one. You can also find us on the Last Turn YouTube channel. We're hoping to populate that with some more videos in addition to hosting our podcasts there. So we have sort of big plans for YouTube in the future.
Yeah, you can totally head there and subscribe now so you can see when we add new stuff. The easiest way to find us on YouTube is to search Last Turn Podcast Hearthstone. I searched that earlier this morning, and we were very first result.
Great. That's perfect. So there's also some other sort of podcast websites you can find us on, or sort of apps. You can find us on player.fm. You can also find us on Beyond Pod and Pocket Casts if you happen to use any of these. We're working on Stitcher, but they're having some errors with accepting new content providers right now. But once those are fixed, we will be on Stitcher as well.
Oh, my.
So we really have quite a wide representation. We're going wide on our podcast representation.
Stitcher sounds like it could be a completely different website.
It's a place where you buy clothes or sludge belchers.
Stitcher.
So with that, we will catch you guys next turn.
Yes. Yes, thanks so much for joining us, guys. We hope we provided useful information, and if there's any more things specifically you'd like to hear about, please leave us a comment.
Absolutely. You can get in touch with us on any of the places that we mentioned, and we are attentive.